Hello, everybody. Wow, that was a little bit strange. Apparently, YouTube had changed up their OBS connection, so when I went to go hit live stream, nothing happened. Hey, welcome back. This is Thursday night. It's Avionics Education, and we're going to talk about that interesting subject. What is an avionics technician? And really, quite frankly, what do you need to know to be one? Welcome, aviation enthusiasts and dreamers. If we haven't met before, my name is Bruce Bissett. I am an expert in all things airplanes. I'm a 40-year survivor in the aviation industry. I teach avionics, maintenance, aircraft ownership, and FAA regulations. I teach both online and in classrooms. My students come from high school, colleges, repair stations, and the FAA Academy. So let's start a conversation and shed some light on this wild world of aviation. Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's Thursday. This is an interesting subject in the fact that people make the assumption we know what one is, but what is an avionics technician? I mean, I've gone to many interviews when I was younger looking for a job, and they would interview me and ask me, the usual HR questions: where do you see yourself in 5 years, and and the other questions. But I come to find out they didn't really know what they wanted in an avionics person, because in the United States we do not have a FAA regulated or FAA certificated basic knowledge requirement like an airframe and power plant mechanic does. And that's really what an A&P certificate is. When somebody hires an A&P, somebody who claims to be an A&P mechanic, and they have the certificate, everybody in the world knows what that minimum knowledge level is, because there is a set of curriculum that goes with that the person had to have X amount of experience, either working in the military or going to school or doing 30 months of on-the-job training. They knew that they took a test on basic subjects. They knew that they had an oral and a practical. So there's a sense of knowledge to what an A&P mechanic is. True, it's a license to learn. When they get out of school or when they get a newly minted certificate, then they need to actually go and start learning to work on the aircraft. Everybody does who works in aviation. When you get to your place of business, whoever hires you, if it's an FAA regulated company, an airline, a repair station, a GA shop, okay, it's up to them to ensure that you as a technician are trained and qualified to work on the aircraft. That's true for avionics technicians, but we don't have a U.S. recognized or U.S. Consolidated certificate, if you will. And I wanted to, before we get too far away here, what I wanted to remind us, please, if you like what I do here and want to learn more about aviation, avionics, please hit that subscribe button to the channel. And don't forget to share it and like it, because it does help me with the algorithms. I'm really working hard to try to build this channel. I want to be able to do more and more videos, be able to get into more and more avionics trainings. So please help me out by hitting the algorithms. So how did I start? That was a lot of the questions, is that where did I come from? I mean, I'm actually pretty much atypical for a person who claims to be an avionics technician. Well, keep in mind, I'm also an A&P mechanic and have been for many, many years at IA. My attitude toward aviation maintenance is I really never saw an airplane as an either or, as an avionics or mechanics, even though each of them were both secondary skill sets. I mean, what a mechanic does on an aircraft can be kind of a lot different than what we classify as an avionics technician on an aircraft, particularly large air carrier aircraft, because of really complicated, complex systems, a lot of moving parts around the airplane, a lot of different things going on. So over the years, the mechanic was the number one person working on the aircraft, and then we started putting radios on the aircraft, and we had what we call RDs, radio and electronic technicians, that came in, and they would do the specialty work. During World War II, everybody was a mechanic, but we had the radio operators themselves were actually trained, even though they flew in the aircraft as aircrew members, but they also would be trained to work on the radios and maintain the radios. So technically they were the avionics technician of the day. And that's kind of where that came from. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the basics. I started early on. I mean, I hung around an airport and made myself a nuisance because I love big airplanes, and I was actually a mechanic's helper, in other words, an unpaid person who didn't leave when I was told to. And the mechanics all saw that I had an interest in working on these big aircraft, and I worked on B-17s, World War IIs, and things like that. Hey, hello, Nat. Yes, don't forget, I want to see you people on the chats coming up. Thank you. Waynesboro, PA. Yep, I'm here in San Antonio still. Loving the weather's a little bit changed here. What was I talking about? Oh, that I became myself as a mechanic, but I also kind of wanted to be a pilot. You know, the old saying goes, I really didn't want to know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just know I wanted to be around aircraft in as many capacities as I want to. When I ended up still in high school working as kind of a mechanic assistant, I mean, I was in there helping change spark plugs, moving ladders, cleaning out. These were fire bombers, so I cleaned out the fire bays. We had it was a Constellation that came in with an engine that lost an oil pump. Literally came off the back of the engine. I crawled up into the wheel well, into 55 gallons of very cold oil. It was hot when it came out of the engine, but at 25, 30,000 feet for a couple hours, it gets really cold, which was actually a nice change in Mesa, Arizona in the summertime. But I went down and I was rooting around there, finding the pump. I found the pump. I found all the bolts and stuff. Absolutely loved it. My mother said I came home covered in oil with a big smile on my face. You can see I need my teeth brushed. But I loved working on aircraft. Later on, I moved to Indiana. This is the life of a person who lives in, or who has a parent that works in aviation. You move quite a bit, and he moved us to Indiana. When I was there, I was still in high school. I still had my mechanic itch, and they found out that you can sign for somebody, and go into the military, in the Air National Guard at the time, not the Air Force yet. And the career field I picked then, and this was at the assistance of my father, is that avionics, because that's what he had done also. He was an A&P first, then became avionics when he worked for the airlines. So he chose me an AFSC field that was as broad a system as possible. And the reason for that is at the time, and I'm not sure of the MOS code system now, or the AFSC. AFS stands for Air Force Specialty Code. And they've made some really big changes. In a previous video, we talked about MOS and ASVC codes. And I think I had a shot of one here somewhere. Bear with me when I pull it up. To where we had a list of codes. Now, the FAA would use this list. Come on, where is it, Bruce? Where is it? Where are you? Which is not here on my page, so just trust me, I see it. It has all the AFSC and military operators code, MOS codes, specialty codes for Navy and Marines that were eligible for an A&P credit, and that was on an earlier video I showed you before. Those AFSCs were similar in the fact that they had some airframe elements, they had some power plant elements, and there was a few that would be qualified for airframe and power plant. But what you didn't have in that was the avionics elements. And I did some Google search and I looked on the websites, and the way the Air Force has done the AFSC codes, or the new codes, is not a whole lot of information on the website. So you have to make sure that if you want to get my avionics experience in the military like I did, you need to ask the recruiter exactly what specialty you're going to be going into. I did find some videos on the internet that talked about radio, comm, DAV. We had in the shop, I was in the Air Force, so I eventually went in the Air Force, and I was originally instrument systems, which means I did the compass systems, fuel quantity systems. These were all based on gyro-based instruments, synchro instruments. We did instrument-based systems, flight instruments, etc. We had a comm nav next door. I didn't find out, it was funny. INS stands for inertial navigation system, and then we had the I forgot the name of it a second. We also had autopilot in our same shop with electrics, which was great for me because I could cross-train into those other shops, being all in the same group. So that was perfect, solid avionics experience. From there, I could get a job with the airlines. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the different jobs in the avionics world as it is. So that's what it was for me. My avionics experience in the Air Force was enough technical knowledge for me to get hired with an airline. And the issue was that the airline was still going to be supposedly training me. I didn't get much training. But we'll talk about that here in a second. Let's see, any more than that? Anybody else here? I'm looking at my chat window here. Just one? Oh no, there's 5 of you out there. Come on, talk to me. So that's the gist of this thing. What is an avionics technician? Now, in America, we do not have a FAA license for avionics, but yet we have FAA avionics inspectors. If you go to, and I did this today, if you went to JS Firms, and I just picked JS Firms as a starting point, they're a clearinghouse for a lot of jobs titled avionics. These are avionics jobs. And right now in America, as of today, and remember, avionics is usually about third the size of a mechanic job, and I'm looking at 2,892 openings right now for an avionics of varying degrees. Now, when I drilled down to look at who they were looking for, there was, generally speaking, there was actually 5 different levels or 5 different types of technicians, and I'll cover those here in a second. In fact, I'll probably cover those right now. Before that, so they're looking for avionics technicians. Well, where are they getting the experience? Where do they want these avionics technicians to come from? I already mentioned the military. Military was the #1 top trainer for many, many years. The many years meaning that a lot of people who got into be maintainers became an avionics technicians. Even the Army, the Marines, they all had various levels. I noticed that in the Navy, I had a buddy of mine that was in the Navy that taught me at the school. Their system was a little bit more broad than the Air Force. A lot of people felt in the Air Force that an avionics specialty was really, really narrow. And it really was when I was in the Air Force for your first year. But once you got to your 5-level training level, you had a training jacket and you had all the materials that you had to do. I mean, one of them, I'd laugh, I had to do periscopic sextant alignment. We also was heavy in shop work because we did, for the aircraft I initially worked on, we actually had to work on shop. So I did learn bench check. We'll talk about bench check. So military was a great way to break into the airlines. But we don't have, we do not have a single skill set for an avionics technician. Who I got here? Yasmin Laporte. Hello, I'm avionics from Argentina. Yeah, not the same technology here for avionics. Thanks for this, your perspective. Yes, that's true. That was another thing. How do we define avionics? But anyway, that's one way. Another place to get into avionics is manufacturing. And the reason being is that there used to be a time years ago when radios would be in the airplane for 30 years. I'm talking about the old King radios and things like that. And, hi, Nat. Oh, yeah, you have an NCAT. I'll talk about NCAT in a second. And we used to be able to do bench check. And we would take the radios apart and we'd put them on oscilloscopes. So we had signal generators. We had turntables if we did gyros. If we did pitot-static systems, we had altitude chambers. There was all sorts of unique test equipment to be working in a shop. Well, that's going away now. There's fewer and fewer shops. Now, I still see some instrument shops out there, but the radio shops, particularly if you're talking about the new, what I would call the cockpit suites of radios, to where even on the general aviation aircraft, we have the main screen on the front. I'm not going to mention too many names, Garmin, but there's a lot of radio equipment, but they have LRUs in the back. So those, even on the general aviation level, they started getting into similar setups for advancement in the GA airplanes as the air carrier airplanes, which meant that we lost those shops that could work on the aircraft. Most of the manufacturers want to see their components come back to them or to an approved repair facility blessed by the manufacturer, most of the time in the manufacturer. I've worked at a couple places here, even recently, to where it was the manufacturer, but they had a repair station line. They would come in, the parts would come in the door, they would go through repair. Same bench checks, same equipment and things like that that you would do for manufacturing, except they would have extra steps for repair. So that's a great way to get in. Manufacturers they only want you to have the soft skills, which A&P school really taught them well. We cannot tell you how many people, as in our A&P school, we lost to other industries because it taught you how to show up and punch a time clock, keep track of records. It was, being able to read and use basic tools and equipment. So there was a lot of those soft skills that other industries wanted in our vocational technical. But that's a good place to go. And there was manufacturing for a bench check. And then also there's manufacturing. They're going to teach you how to work on their equipment. Going to school for avionics, it's tough. And I got to tell you right now, I look out there. I know what schools are out there. I see lots of advertisement for instructors, and that was one of the 4 levels looking for instructors for these what I call avionics programs. And I need to talk about, when we talk about school, we need to talk about accreditation. In other words, what is the school using to validate their training for the school? Okay. And I also say, don't discount A&P yet. Just because you want to get an avionics, I still think you should strive to get at least the airframe rating from a school, and I really do recommend that. And the last part of the job, and it's starting to come out more and more, a lot of companies, in fact, I was at a repair station here, it's a couple weeks ago now, and I showed you the video from the ramp, beautiful Arizona. And they had an airline there, so it was a small 10 or less airplanes, but they were training their own technicians. So they took it upon themselves to create their own OJT program. So the mechanics and A&Ps and the avionics people that they were training, they were creating in their own company, hiring people from school. Again, getting through the interview process to be able to, have those basic skills you need to get a job, technical skills. And then they would basically help these technicians become A&P technicians. I thought it was interesting. They also were doing just about anything else in the place that needed to be repaired, and that's a great way to get into maintenance. But what are the jobs out there right now, and what do you need to know? And I was looking at the JS Firm's website, and I've looked at a couple other websites. There's also a lot of recruiters out there looking for people, and we've got avionics installers, and those tend to be GA aircrafts. I've got manufacturer best check out there. There was manufacturers out here, including even the big companies, Boeing and Honeywell, were looking for avionics technicians, but it was for their line. You've got heavy check, and heavy check mechanics we talk about in maintenance repair organizations, MRO, and they're usually doing work for the airlines. The ones that get you the most money are the ones that need to have the most experience. And those are ones that were looking for line technicians, people that are going to be working on the aircraft on the line, which means you need to work fast, you need to work safe, you need to also be able to have a really good knowledge of the aircraft. And again, I saw there a lot of openings for instructors. For me, they can't draw me away because I really like doing what I'm doing. They just don't pay enough. In fact, I think if you were looking for it, there was an airline in Denver that was also looking for an instructor. Okay, because they're required, MROs and airlines are also required to ensure that technicians are trained. So they're doing a lot of their own in-house training. So let's talk about the installer real quick. Its environment, you tend to work in a hangar because, or undercover, because you're taking apart a customer's aircraft. Tends to be general aviation, single engines. You're doing avionics upgrades for, like, maybe taking out the old steam gauges and putting in the glass cockpits we talked about before for aftermarket mods. For them, the skills that you need to have. You need to have a basic understanding of how to deal with wiring diagrams. And hey, Avionics Tech from KQ Millie, 513. I have to ask if you're military, what AFSC are you? You have to have a great knowledge of basic tools, but I'm talking about avionics tools. I'm going to probably talk about the fact that you need to know how to use a crimper tool and be able to understand a D-sub connector or a cannon plug or whatever connector. I used to say Molex, but Molex is for most systems are no longer being used for avionics just because the tolerances now for the communications is much higher. The other thing you need to do is you need to have an ability to be able to route and install wiring in aircraft, route it the proper way, secure it the proper way, which means have a basic knowledge of the advisory circular. A lot of people do it. The issue with working on general aviation aircraft as an avionics installer, it's not a good or bad thing, but you tend to have an AMP-IA around because you're considered uncertificated at this point. So you'll have the skill set of being able to install the equipment, but the issue is that you won't be able to sign for it for yourself. You cannot sign for your own work. Now, if I told you before, Part 43 was our rules about performing maintenance, and all maintenance must be documented, and then for the aircraft to be returned to service by a technician certified under Part 65, an A&P or a repairman. We'll talk about that. We're going to cover repairman a little bit later. So it's a great entry-level job. There's a learning curve that's involved, but you'll learn some basic system skills. And I'm also getting requests from operators out there, and I talk to repair stations and help them with their technical training. And one of them I was asking for was, I think my highest looked at video on YouTube is one I did for literally, I had an avionics installer month class in my avionics course, and this was a 1-hour session on cannon plugs that I put online, and I've got over 24,000 views on that. And I thought, yeah, but I wish you would take the whole course. The next type I talked about this for was manufacturing. Again, manufacturers love to hire from military, no matter what you did. Even if you didn't really do any aircraft maintenance in the military, manufacturers tend to like to hire the military just because of their mindsets of where they came from, being the structure. But they don't require it. People from high school, if you interview well. But the benefit of the manufacturer, one, if it's a big manufacturer, you have the benefits of longevity of a company that you didn't typically get for GA anymore. It's inside for the most part. If you're working on parts and components, manufacturers, unless you're working on the line for the big aircraft, but I think I'm talking about avionics, we consider that bench work. And usually what they do as a manufacturer, they'll start you on the manufacturing line, and as you develop your skills and your abilities to use the tools and the test equipment for their product, you'll start then transitioning and learning your skills you need to work on the repair station side. And the FAA looks at manufacturing different than repair. So there'll be two different set of rules, but the skill set will be the same. And like I said, the training is going to be provided by the company, and that's a benefit in that if you could, there's lots of jobs out there. Again, if you don't want to work on the flight line all the time, which quite frankly, I used to be, and I still like to work outside, so I don't mind working outside. Let's talk heavy check. They do hire people with 1 to 2 to 3 years of experience on aircraft. So if you're coming from GA, that's a good transition point, especially if you're working on jets and GA. Heavy check we always think of as the MROs, the repair stations that are doing work for the airlines. But the difference is the skill level for a heavy check person, somebody who's doing routine maintenance on an aircraft. There's not a whole lot of troubleshooting. In other words, not everybody on the crew has to be an expert troubleshooter. In fact, for early in my career, my expertise was probably in radar and autopilot, but we had other people in the shop that would be expert in other systems, but we all knew how to do system checks. We understand how to read instructions on the work cards, which came from the maintenance manuals, and we would do routine system checks. If there was a problem, we would create a non-routine, right? Fix it as we need to, or use your skills to work with people, and then to get help to come in and troubleshoot a system. But for the most part, it was never repetitive. I really enjoyed heavy check. I did it for a major airline. The airline I worked for had in-house heavy check for C checks. They sent out their really heavy check, the D checks. But the other first airline I worked there was an avionics tech inside. A lot of it can be kind of funny. We talk about, having to do the, I call it the circuit breaker tech. It was a 30-page card, and all the circuit breakers on a 757 are on the overhead panel. And I'm literally up there pulling breakers, ICAS message, pushing breaker, ICAS message goes out, and you do that for about 5 hours. It is repetitive, but you're, 3 o'clock in the morning, you just be aware, be awake, and get through it. So that was what would I call non-repetitive. But autopilot checks, TCAS checks, system checks, you really get into understand the system. But what that does, a heavy check working in an MRO gets you ready to do, again, getting back to what a heavy check, you need system knowledge, right? You need to know how the system works normally. So we're going to talk about technical knowledge here in a few minutes. After the end, I'm going to hold it up to you guys. So you've been out 20 years, AFS 2A3. Yeah, yes. Okay, so he works on CRJs. I'm looking at QMIL 513. AF2A322. I have to go look that up. But you're right. For me, it was 32571 for my level, and I knew that was instrument systems. But now it's kind of there's a sub-channel system. You need to know modifications. One thing about heavy check is that it's almost an avionics installer, which means you need to know those installation tools, how to route wires, how to modify connectors and cannon plugs, and properly. Being able to read engineering orders, which, trust me, people, they're not that hard. It's just like anything else. It's a skill that you would learn eventually. And then test equipment. You're going to get more into aircraft-specific test equipment. And a pedostatic box, a radio tick, we call it a signal generator if I need to check an autopilot channel and things like that. Okay, that is heavy check. Now, once you're done with that and you're comfortable, and this is where it benefited me, is that our group at the first airline I was at, we had an avionics line support group. So we did C-check support as avionics, but then we did line technician. For an air carrier, no matter the size of jets, it doesn't matter if it's a CRJ, 737, Airbus, okay, a line technician would be the highest level of skills. Ideally, it's also the highest level of pay. I did a lot of line work as overtime in avionics. A line technician, at that point, you need to have the basic system knowledge. When you walk into the airplane, you should be able to know how this airplane works avionics-wise. Be able to get the test equipment out and find out and put your system setups to make sure you know how the airplane operates normally. Then you have to have that troubleshooting skill. Now, a larger aircraft, a CRJs, everything else will have, like for example, the Boeing has the fault isolation manual, the FSIMS manuals with that. So being able to use the troubleshooting guide. Now you're going to be getting into wiring diagrams and maybe chasing a broken wire in a system. One thing about talk about wasted money on a line technician. If you're not a good line technician, they tend to throw boxes at a problem. Air users, sometimes the mechanics will do that also. The problem with that, and most people don't understand that. I know aviation's expensive. We don't want to think about how much it was. It really became a problem for us at the one airline because it was costing us a lot of money. Okay, remember, the basic rule about installing a part on an aircraft is that the mechanic, the avionics technician, must make sure that that part is in an airworthy condition, which means it's got to be a tag. And if we take a part off the shelf and I throw it in an airplane, and then I do the system check and I sign off the paperwork and the airplane flies away, and it comes back again, oh well, that box didn't fix the problem. Well, what do I do with the old box? It's now been pulled off an airplane. It's in service. I can't put it back on the shelf. It needs to be recertified because the next technician needs to be able to see the paperwork to say this thing's been tested and inspected. Well, at the airline I was at, we had to send it back to the manufacturer of that bench job. So we know it was a perfectly good part, but I can't put it back in the aircraft because it has to be in an airworthy condition. That cost an average airline, this is going back 20 years money, $5,000 a part. So if you think about it, throwing that one box is equivalent to a month's pay for you for work. So you've blown a month of your own pay because you keep throwing barks to the airplane every time you throw a part in an airplane because you didn't do the proper troubleshooting. Now, I'm not saying changing out the boxes is 100% wrong. many of the fault isolation menu has you swapping out the boxes, but you would do that based on the manufacturer's instructions. So we'll get into that later on. So a line technician is a high desired job. I loved it. Granted, you're outside in the weather and the rain and everything else, but at the same time, I enjoy the challenge of it. I enjoyed being out there on the flight line, and that's why I became an instructor. I have a tendency to like attention. Okay, how we doing, everybody? Anybody got anything for me? Questions? Hi, everybody. Who do I have? I only have. It says I have a few people on, 8 people on. I actually had somebody I met here in San Antonio, and I hope she was on. I told her that when I taught avionics at my college, I had probably 2, 3, 4 women per class, and I told her, all of my women technicians were just as successful as any of the men technician. And I tried to encourage her. She didn't want to work at a restaurant anymore. She could go with that. And the last one, I saw a lot of jobs for instructors. The trouble is the knowledge level for instructors kind of all over the page as far as what a company wants. Because I guess to me, technical skills very important if I'm going to go work for any of the other 4. There's no instructors usually for an installer, but they would go out and get that instruction. But for an airline or a repair station or MRO, they're going to want somebody with the system knowledge of whatever they work on. Large aircraft, CRJs, business jets, whatever. But the most important thing about an instructor is the ability to get in front of the students and be able to convey information. And then also to be able to have that ability as an instructor to read to make sure that it's coming along. And I understand, and I have to mention this before, that a lot of people would forego the avionics program that I taught because, and this is probably a little bit on the other instructors, is that, well, he's going to make you read. Over here on my side, we play with tools on the A&P side. You get to do things. People say, well, I don't learn by reading. I learn by doing hands-on. And I have to go through and tell you right now that if you think you can have a career in aviation and not read or not have the ability to comprehend what you read, you are probably more dangerous than worth it for the company. Reading for a mechanic, reading for an avionics tech is important for both jobs. So now keep in mind, there's no math. Don't worry about it. There's not a whole lot of math. In fact, very little math. I think the last math I did, and I'm still working on GA airplanes right now. I got to move a fuel line. And I'm trying to remember, going back, what size conversion from the 316 pipe. What was that, number 6 tubing? Yeah. But anybody else? Let's see. No comments, no chats. Come on, people, talk to me. Don't make me feel like I'm alone here, but I am alone here. Yeah, I didn't get a whole lot of questions prepped for this week, so I'm just kind of winging it here. I'm hoping that people talk about it. But let's talk about certificates. There are, like I said, I told you before, it's true that the FAA does not have a certificate that they issue for somebody who wants to call themselves an avionics technician to go apply for a job somewhere. And why? Because every other country in the world has an avionics type rating additional certificate. Now I know some people point out the Canadian system. I think the Canadian system probably is the pendulum swinging too far, personally. But the European side system actually works pretty good because they do have on your A and P, and then they have an avionics skill set. And a lot of it actually is picked up by the second certificate here, which is the NCAT certification. Now, the FCC I'm talking about first, because what is the FCC's place in aviation? And traditionally, or technically speaking, yes, the federal, if you're not familiar with it, it's the Federal Communication Commission's General Radio Operators License. It's the GROW. And you need, according to the FCC, not FAA, the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, if you are going to be a technician that is going to be working or performing maintenance on a broadcast object, a radio or receiver. Usually it's mostly about radios. And they used to have like a 5-watt limit. If 5 watts or greater, you're required to have a growl. And the whole point was that, did you have the technical or the basic knowledge to be able to work on the equipment? Traditionally, for the airlines, it actually was a requirement to work for an airline as a union object. The reason being is that the unions were paying license premiums. But since avionics or R&Es at the time didn't have an avionics license, they wanted the ability to get a license premium the same as the mechanics were. So what the airlines had agreed to through the union, because the FCC was a federally issued knowledge test, they would require FCCs for all people working on the air carrier for the company. Now, the first air carrier I worked for didn't have a union. We didn't have a union, but they required all the avionics technicians to have FCCs. And you didn't have to have it the first day you worked, but they gave you like 3 months to go get it. And you got to remember, this is back in 1989, so we actually flew to LA to take the test from Phoenix, because it wasn't like today where you can take it electronically. So the FCC before was 100 questions or so, and it was based on radio principles. There was a section in there on ship-to-shore regulations, and it was okay. I mean, I never had an opportunity as an avionics tech to get on the radio and call Mayday. Not from the gate. Not quite a problem for me. Larry says, the GA say avionics seems to be more lucrative. Yes, that could be sometimes argued. I think right now it's paying just as well on the GA side, avionics, and I think a lot of people like the work environment of GA. As far as, I'm getting lots of questions. People want me to work GA for them. So yeah, absolutely. Recently applied for a job at Sierra Nevada for Avionics Tech 2. Yeah, did you get it? Now, I'll ask you in the chat, number, what I was because I'd love to know. Now, Nate, you got my interest now. What did they ask you at the interview? And what were some of the requirements? So if you got to put that in the chat, I'd love to hear that. So finishing up with the FCC. Now, the FCC has changed. The FCC years ago, I don't know, through a FOIA request, because it didn't used to be a published test. You had to go, and I think I remember I bought Goldberg or Goldstein was the name of the book. It was a yellow book, and it was based on exit interviews. So, hey, these people knowing each other. It was based on people exit interviews, asking what questions are, and this person would go through and write down questions, which was what a lot of kind of what I did for the NCAT. But the NCAT, when we get to that, actually was pretty good in the fact that the NCAT was a published standard, and that become our accreditation of my college, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So now, fast forward, now the test is published. So people now are basically taking a study course on the weekend. Sometimes, if you're good at tests, and just getting the certificate, it no longer had its usefulness in really ensuring that the person had that basic knowledge of what it meant to be an avionics technician. Now they have, to FCC's credit, they did go through and add a couple questions on aviation radios. I think there's a question in on DME, especially we're talking about the radar endorsement. I do have a video on YouTube talking about, is the FCC still relevant? It's actually required. If you go back and you read the FCC rules and the requirements for the growl, the fact that we would work on the aircraft's radar system, especially if you're messing between the waveguide and the antenna itself, the FCC says specifically in the rule you must have an FCC growl with radar to be able to remove and replace that waveguide. Now, I have never ever seen it as a requirement in the airlines, but it's there. So it's good for the companies to say, well, you came with an FCC, because then they know, okay, he knows electronics of some port, but not aviation electronics. The next one, so that's the FCC. The next one is the NCAT certificate. And what I'd like to do, I'm just going to go ahead and if you'll bear with me. Hi, Yasmin. Yasmin's here. Vic, I think Vic Demerick D has been on here before, haven't you? Am I still have people? Hey, I'm getting more and more people. Love it. Haven't been advertising this too much, but I have a feeling this one's going to get a lot of attention in the end. But I want to go through real quick, if you'll bear with me. Now, what happened is the NCAT certification, just to go back to its history, they initially started out as a group of people that was an answer to why didn't the FAA come up with the minimum knowledge requirements for an avionics technician. So what NCAT did, and it's been, my gosh, coming up on 30 years now, if you can believe it, because I think it was 10 years old when I started teaching at my college. The college liked the NCAT because it was an accreditation that we could set up for the class. And I'm going to go through the standards here in a second. I have to go through NCAT. And I have to be careful I can get to it. The problem is sometimes the way it works is that NCAT oops, come on. I may have to pay for it, and I got to be careful. Okay, but I do have another copy, so bear with me. I'll go ahead and pull it up in a minute. So we had an accreditation. There was actually a main part, the NCAT AET, and I do have again a video on this channel that talks about the NCAT AET, and that was the Aviation Electronic Technician test. And the beauty of that test, it was actually in 3 parts. The first part of the test was basic electricity, and it was the exact same basic electricity subjects that you would see in an A&P basic electricity course. So NCAT people felt it was important that a person who's going to be working on an aircraft should really have the same knowledge base as an A&P mechanic. So that's the reason why 1/3 of it was basic electricity. But remember, a test that's not published. The questions were a little bit more, you can't memorize questions. The other 1/3 was actually all the rest of the general subject. So they wanted you to know about basic hardware. They wanted you to know about tools and equipment. They wanted you to know about corrosion. They wanted you to know about regulations, some basic documents. So it was an outline of, our weight and balance and all sorts of these things that if I'm going to work as an avionics technician, I should have the same basic knowledge as a person who's working as an A&P mechanic, a general's. And that's really what this was kind of modeled after, was after the A&P. In fact, the people, NCAT was originally out of Tarrant County, which was an A&P school. Nice people. I used to work with them quite a bit when I started learning on it. But in the same sense, the third element of the AET was base knowledge to help you carry on through. In other words, a prerequisite to carry on to what they did for the add-on ratings. And what they did is they had 4 or 5 add-on ratings. They're still working on it. Because ASTM is managing the certification now, they are kind of making improvements and tweaking it. So they did come up with another NCAT certification. So anyway, finishing up, the add-on ratings actually are designed to mimic sort of the add-on rating for the A&P. If you think about it, an A&P is the general's test, basic knowledge, prerequisite. You cannot get the ratings for an A&P, airframe or power plant, until you pass the generals. AETs, the NCAT AET is the exact same purpose. Once you pass the NCAT AET, then you go through and get the add-on ratings. And that was what that third element of the AET was, the base knowledge of the radio information, kind of similar to the FCC. We had oscillators and amplifiers that carried over to the add-on ratings. And then the add-on ratings were, for example, to me, the biggest one is radio communication systems, because most of the elements in the radio communications add-on rating was really mimicking the FCC, or what the FCC should be when it came to aircraft radios. So, in fact, I just finished one of the textbooks I did here for the RCS, so you can see that on my website. for radio communications. And that's where you're going to learn about, you know, decibels, what a decibel is, attenuation, signal, line loss, types of antenna, high gain versus low gain. All that relative radio information is on the RCS. Then you carry over to other add-on radios called dependent navigation system. And to me, that builds on our RCS, radio communications, because dependent navigation are those aircraft systems that are dependent on ground stations. So let me go back and change it. Sorry. So is this correct? Yasmin's got a great question. It's correct? Instructor is the top level for avionics in the USA, or do you need more skills? Actually, sometimes schools carry more weight on the ability to teach versus their knowledge of systems. So I find it easier for me to teach because I have such a really good knowledge of systems. So it's easier for me to talk about the aircraft. And sometimes I feel bad. I do sometimes go a little bit over the students' heads because I have to make the assumption that they don't know anything. But at the same time, I do have experienced people in the class that, you know, say, well, why are you covering this? I already know it. Well, not everybody does. I had people that were straight out of high school, GEDs, and then I had, occasion, I had an electrical engineer, and I had an airline pilot or two that came in, and some crew chiefs that came in. So I had to be all over the page. So some avionics require clearance. How do you get it? Oh boy, that's a good question. Because I'm here in San Antonio, and they're looking for people to work on the Air Force One, and it is tough because I think out of 1,000 people that they put in that they hire for the clearance, I heard somebody say as many as 900 get kicked out to maybe even 990 get kicked out. They only get 10 people that could pass the security clearance. So, but keep in mind, that's just for that one aircraft in there, the one type of aircraft, one program. Boeing here has got, I think they're up to 5 programs right now. They have the 737 MAX, which is finishing up, 787. So the commercial side is going to be gone. They got F-18s, they got F-15s coming in. I just heard B-52s are coming in. And B-52s are coming in for the avionics upgrade and the engine upgrade. So they're going to go from we used to call 8-engine smokers to 4 engines. I'm not sure the model number of the engine, but they're definitely going to be quieter. Going to be weird for a B-52 that's just coming up on 70 years old. So some engine required clearance. So as far as your clearance, it's the same for any job that's a clearance. So if you go to usajobs.gov, there's jobs in there that are posted that'll have clearance requirements. Biggest thing is just make sure you don't have any felonies. I think it's part of it. Great question, though. Yes, keep them up. I want to see the questions. They help me out. Let's see. I was talking about the NCAT and the add-on ratings. Dependent navigation. Again, dependent is exactly what it is. It's those systems that are dependent on a ground station or sky station. So we're talking GPS, distance measuring equipment, which is a little bit different. That's pulse radio. But that's included in that chapter. VHF COM is all as actually. I'll be careful. That's actually another section in there. But I switch it out. What else is in there for dependent navigation? Oh, ILS, instrument landing systems, VOR systems, ADF if you still have it. I mean, there's still airplanes out there at ADF. So that's dependent. Then they have autonomous navigation, and that's a pretty good talk about I call those the flight instrument section. At least in my class, I did the flight instruments. So I did the 6-pack of instruments in that class because I did cover the gyroscopic instruments. The compass system is also autonomous. I had a separate class for autopilot flight director, and so that was autonomous. And they have these onboard safety communication systems, which I would include in my radio communication. So VHF COM was also included in PA systems. I did cockpit flight recorder, cockpit voice recorder in that for my program, things like that. But then I had a completely separate class for pulse radio principles, and that's where I covered the aircraft weather radar, and transponder systems, which is the system that talks to air traffic control. And then I also include radio altimeter and DME. All these instruments operate on pulse radio principles. In other words, it sends a signal out, and then either the same signal comes back for radar, or it triggers a response from the ground and another signal comes back in. Pulse radio principles. And then in addition to that class, I had the advanced systems. So I also did ground proximity and TCAS, and among other things. And I think that was it. And then there's install. I think NCAT's also doing the installer class. And like I said, I'm having a heck of a time getting the NCAT certification. I don't know why they're not letting me on. Because I have to buy it. All right, so I have it published in a lot of my books here. So if you go to my website, and I may put them on the chats for the. I won't publish the standards because it's like 10, 15 pages. So you have to be careful as a school. You have to buy the new certification to make sure you're teaching from the correct one, and that's the other thing you want to look for the school. The other one on here I want to talk about. So that was the NCAT. NCAT is great because the NCAT mimic the A and P. My problem is that the people that are hiring them, not all of them know about the NCAT certification. So somebody wants to ask me if I have an A and P, do I need to go get my NCAT? In my mind, if you plan to be just an A and P, I would probably say, probably not. However, if you want to get into avionics, then I would really key in on operator to get into those add-on ratings. In other words, get the radio communication systems and then get the dependent navs and the autonomous navs. At least those three for sure, to help you out to sell that for that. Let's see, how am I doing today? 30 views. I'm up to 30 views. I mean, like I said, I'm not. Some of the live feeds and chats that I talk to, we have 275,000 subscribers. Hey guys, I'm not up to 2,000 yet. So this is a very niche field that we're talking about here. But it's going to be less nichey. I know that there's going to be a huge shortage. I mean, I'm getting busy. I'll talk about at the end of the session what I'm doing to talk about it. So let's talk about the repairman. This ties back to NCAT and FCC. Part 65, a repairman certificate is issued under Part 65. It's the same rule that an A&P mechanic has done. If I'm working for an airline, or if I'm working for an MRO, a repair station under 145, those are eligible for certain technicians to have a repairman certificate that allows them to sign off for their own work. Okay? So when I worked for an airline, and this is before I had my A&P, I got my A&P actually while I was working at the airlines, I could sign for my own work, return to service, because I had a repairman. So any avionics work I did, I could sign off the logbook, or I could sign off a work card. I had a repairman certificate. Same thing for a repair station. However, it cannot be issued, and your FAA inspector should know this, it cannot be issued for any function that would require an airframe or power plant. So it's only issued for the repairmen that are working in avionics for the airlines. Now, to make it easier, if you're working in a 145 repair station, right, even if it's not an airline one, and you have an NCAT certification and one add-on rating, and it's usually an add-on rating that's associated with the rating of the repair station you're working for, the FAA will issue you a repairman certificate for your work that's done in that repair station, so that you can be certified using your NCAT credentials. And the FAA knows that there's a letter or a policy guidance that allowed them to issue that certificate. So what does the NCAT installer class cover? That's a great question because I've never heard that. You talk about it's the new rating, right? I know what an installer is for my program, so I haven't bought the new rating, so I haven't seen it yet. I understand it's probably wire routing. It's probably schematic reading would be an important part of it. Definitely tools and equipment, and then there's some basic knowledge. But for the most part, an avionics installer is doing just that. It's installing, slight modifications to an aircraft, maybe a little bit of taking an airplane apart, so you'll learn how to take panels off and panels and interiors out of the aircraft. Usually that's under the watchful eye of an A&P mechanic if you're working in general aviation. So very good. But Herman, I'm going to keep that question. I'm going to put that in my final chat feed, and I'm definitely going to look at it for the next time we meet. So that's the repairman, but that's side into the NCAT and the FCC, because NCAT and FCC can be used by the FAA to qualify you for a repairman that allows you to sign for your work. What does that mean? Sometimes it means more money. They'll pay you more. Now keep in mind, a repairman certificate, as I told before, only is good for the place that it's issued for, because you'll see on the repairman it actually only have that repair station number or the airline number, and only have those limitations of what you could do for the airline. It'll say for avionics work, or I'll say whatever it is for that. Okay, so now we talk about the jobs. We talked about the rules. So what should you know before you want to think about getting in avionics? And I always say this before, and you could do this as a school. Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. I'm going to hope to put the right, what do you call it, the words in it, the search words in that. What do you need to know when you come in? Basic electricity. I mean, I tell everybody, if you're going to work on anything, even non-aviation, you should have a good knowledge of basic electricity. And basic electricity is how a battery works, for example, and how wires work, and how things move on, and how, the basics of electricity. I guess I say basic of electricity. Anyway, I know people get hung up, make me do the math on that. Well, the math is designed to teach you mathematically, in other words, through calculations, of how certain laws work. Even when you take A&P generals, you're going to get into Boyle's law and hydraulics law. There's all sorts of other technical formulas that we went into. In avionics or basic electricity, you're going to be doing those calculations based on Kirchhoff's law, because he had understanding the rules for series circuit, understanding the rules for parallel. So the whole point of the math is to help you understand mathematically how a circuit functions between parallel and series. So don't get angry with the instructor for making you teach the formulas and the math. It's all designed to give you an understanding of how electrons move through the wire. Even when you get into impedance and little coils of wire, how does a coil of wire create impedance? Well, impedance is just a form of resistance, right? But that gets really big. That impedance then carries over to how a motor functions, or how a radio broadcasts, how an antenna functions. So basic electricity is great. Another one is to get into the FAA generals. And the FAA generals help you understand how an airplane basically operates, how what weight and balance is, some of the basics rules. Again, understanding corrosion. Like today, I'm doing a movement of this little story. I'm literally moving a fuel line because someone put it someplace where, first rule, avionics or aircraft 101, do not put a fuel line where a passenger could use it as a handhold. So now I got to move a fuel line, so I'm ordering fittings. Well, the people at the other end sent me half steel, half aluminum fittings. What you learn in A&P generals is that you don't mix steel and aluminum. That sets up corrosion. So that's a great thing you should know anytime you're working around an aircraft. Then also having an understanding of some basic AC66. I love it. Lame license. Exactly. So New Zealand has that aviation rating. Basic test equipment. Not only the multimeter, which is just, you'll get that in basic electricity. I think for the basic electricity course I show you at the end, I talk about oscilloscopes, time domain reflectometer. Yeah, great questions. Valerons, I love that name. Let me I'll answer that question in a second. Perfect question. And getting back to the test equipment, there is a section on oscilloscopes. Don't get hung up on oscilloscopes. Those are really getting out of date because an oscilloscope was something that was really used in bench checking. It's actually used if you're working in a calibration lab or radio signals. But right now we've got a lot of great handheld test equipment for that. But pedostatic box, a flight line tester for a transponder, a flight line tester for the radios, be able to do VORs and things, and comms for that matter. Understanding systems, okay, and that's where the add-on ratings come on. And I do a lot of right now. The stuff that I'm doing for repair stations now is I'm doing a lot of technical training. My transponder course is being really popular because if you have a repair station that wants a limited instrument rating, I offered this transponder course. And then I had a customer say, hey, my guys don't know pedostatic. So I just put together an 8-hour pedostatic course for them on Zoom. So I'm doing a lot of technical classes right now, more than the NCAT courses. Yes, absolutely. It's not the 8110 Avionics Technician handbooks. I funny, Ben, I think to me, when I look at that, I think pilot. But it is, I always tell my avionics students, you should know about the avionics system as what a pilot needs to know. That's the base level. At that point, then after that, you're in avionics. But you should know how to be a pilot, what the pilot looks at. Let's see. And then troubleshooting. Again, the key to being a good troubleshooter is not just chasing wires in an airplane or understanding schematics, but it's also understanding how the system works normally. There is no way you could troubleshoot an airplane if you don't understand how all the systems function normally. That's why when we talk about a line maintenance technician, somebody who could troubleshoot problems on the line, then you have to know the systems first. So that's why I spend a lot of time in my courses with the systems classes. So that's the way it works. How am I doing here? All right, guys, awesome. Do I have a textbook manual to recommend for basic installation and logics? That's a good question. Now, my radio communications book has a section in there on installation of wiring and connectors, and then also my Avionics Technician Handbook Volume 1 also has basic knowledge on installation. I plan to actually put all those together into one book. So, but we were talking about the 8083, which is the handbook. I have a copy of it here somewhere. I have a bunch of them there. Yeah, you should know the pilot stuff too. Absolutely know how to look, because a lot of the stuff, especially there was one on there on the glass cockpit system. That's free from the FAA, FAA.gov. You go down to the ACE advisory circulars or the handbooks. Both of those will have some good stuff. So yes, pilot stuff's very good. Let's see. So troubleshooting, that's it. We covered the knowledge. And I talked about that. And that's all I have to talk about that. Awesome, guys. Let me go back to this. So now, so far, questions have been coming up. Great. Thank yous for the chats. I'm going to definitely love the chats. Any questions out there so far? What I could do is I could show you what I've been doing, give you an idea about what is available out there. Stand by. Why do you do this to me? Here we go. Take a breath for a second. We've been on for an hour. It's funny is I watch a lot of these YouTubes. I really enjoy. Oh, never mind. I see it. Cool. You found it. I was about ready to show this page. Yada! So, this is my website for my online courses. And what I've been working on lately, and I have to explain something to me. I do sell the NCAT Test Study Guide, Volume 1, Volume 2. Volume 1 is the basic electricity stuff with some of the little advanced stuff. I kind of stopped at the numbering system because it took a long time and my numbers started going down for the number of people actually taking the course. So, because if anybody's ever done any video production, it takes a long time to create videos, especially for something you want to see. So, right now you'll see the first one. I'm breaking it up by ATA chapters. I mean, we talked about initially that we talked about what mechanics did and versus what avionics people do, and in the aviation world, we break it up by ATA, right? So generally speaking, water and waste is a mechanic, and ATA 23 radios to avionics technician, which you get a lot of complaint from the mechanics, but don't blame me for your poor life choice if your hand's in the toilet. Of course, when I got to my airline, where they didn't care if I was avionics or a mechanic, my hand went down into a toilet too. Let me tell you, lots of stories working on an air carrier airplane when you have a couple porta-johns installed in it and what they could put in them. So we have, I'm also doing, you'll see a 3411, ATA 3411. I'm doing that as a pedostatic system. And that's going to be an 8-hour course. Right now I do that as a Zoom class. So if you people want a Zoom class for that, please send me an email or a chat. Repair and alterations, I had a lot of demand for that. And this is, if you ever wondered, this is great for those people who are working in install shops, people that are doing major repairs, major alterations, which the vast majority of them are avionics. So this one talks about the 337. And on the FA4 and 337, determining the parts you're going to be using, determining the what goes on the 337, including, do I need a field approval? And I talk about how to get a field approval and so on and so forth. We spent a lot of time on Block 8. Radio principles, here's 2300. If you see a 00, it's a fundamental. And that is a precursor that I had a request from another repair station for VHF COM. So I'm going to do another class on VHF COM, but at the same time, I'm also going to include the audio selector system in that. But you need to know this one, radio principles, before you do that. There it is. I need to explain the FA A&P General's Basic Electricity course. I took the videos from the NCAT course because it's all the same subjects, except this time I put at each section the practice A&P test questions. So you get to practice the A&P test on that. But it's the same videos that are on the NCAT AET Volume 1 course. That is a private course right now. I'm trying to, like I said, unless I have demand for it, I'm not going to offer it. I've got 3451 for aircraft distance measuring equipment. Again, I had a company. Fundamental batteries, ATA 24 is the A&P battery section. And there's a transponder. Again, these are my big courses. And anything else you guys want out there. Like right now, putting together an avionics installers class. That's going to take time, but it may come up pretty soon. Let's see. So I'm going to go back to this. And that is everything I could talk about an avionics technician as far as all those avenues, all that you want to be, the different ratings. I still always try to tell people, especially when I was at the school I taught at, I know you want to be in avionics, but don't rule out getting your A&P. Just because it opens up your world, but still be an avionics technician. An avionics technician with an A&P is a much valuable person, highly in demand. In fact, you'll probably be poached from airline to airline once you get your skills. So I'm wondering if you know a product with a common radio comm nav bracket pins wiring. Yes, there used to be the website was, I don't know if they had the website, avionicseducation.com. And there used to be a book that I had at one time in my hot little hands. I bought it because I used it for my avionics program. We did installs of King radios, which means we need to know the pinouts between the King's radio and also the Garmin's that we installed and things like that. And that, gosh, it was from avionics.com. It was from the same gentleman that wrote the original Buckwalter book, which was the book I was told I was supposed to spend a year on. And it was good. It was a collection of magazine articles, but I couldn't build a program on it. So that's why I wrote. So far, I've written 8 textbooks on avionics. So I also had to do glass cockpit. So yes, that's a good one too. If you could find it, right now I don't think it's in production. You may find one on eBay, and I don't remember the name of it. Yeah, exactly. Ben was saying the same thing. Swapping older King's Bendix to newer Garmin's, and they do talk to each other. There are certain Kings that will talk to Garmin's. And yeah, the other thing is Garmin's not always good about getting support for what they call off-brand radios and things like that, because they're more than happy to sell you their stuff. But I know that I talk to people that install Aspens, and Aspen has pretty good product support. And I might say Garmin doesn't have. Garmin's got great product support for their stuff. Actually, so the best product support I had was from S-Tech. We were teaching the S-Tech systems, autopilot systems, installed as part of my class, and we had great support from S-Tech. Let's see. And I have to give Garmin credit. They also gave us a G1000 display unit to at least we could show it. But I wanted the whole airplane because I told them I wanted the LRUs. I wanted my guys to learn how to use it. Let's see here. How are we doing, everybody? Well, getting a few views, a few minutes. I think, like you said, this will be I'm going to probably try to keep it short. If you have any other questions, comments, like I said, this will be republished later on tonight after we're done here. You could always continue to ask me questions and then also give me suggestions on what's coming up for next. Like I said, right now I'm doing them every 2 weeks. I am not up to the channels. I mean, I see people that are like posting 2, 3, 4 times a day. But I really can't talk about, Marvel comics and Game of Thrones that much. That's not where my world is right now. My world is in aviation maintenance, and I just finished an FAA class. I did Casad Aircraft Safety Systems. So I just finished that. So I love doing these things. I'll keep talking. Thank you there's 11 people that are on the channel right now. Thank you very much for jumping on the channel. Again, don't forget to subscribe when the next one comes up. I'll put a posting out next week. I'll think about this really hard for a week to come up with a subject next week, but I really need you all to help me to tell me what you want to talk about. I also been toying out the idea of putting out their accident investigations. I've done well over 100 aircraft accident investigations, and I'd probably put some on as lessons learned about maintenance caused accidents. This is when I was an FAA inspector, so I could do a few of those. I won't do general aviation. Yeah, how to talk to tech support, that's a great one, because if you don't come off as slightly knowing what you're talking about, I always say whenever you talk to tech support, have your questions researched. In other words, the last thing tech support wants to talk about is, I don't know what I need. What do you think I need? And they don't get paid by the minute. So they get paid by the customer support. So yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Lloyd. Okay. Well, I want to go ahead and say goodnight, everybody. And I hope we see each other in 2 weeks. And give me some ideas here. I'm working on my private pilot. Private pilot? Oh yes, I had a video. I talked about Nate. This is a question for Nate. Working on my private pilot. Right now, if I wasn't an A&P, I wouldn't have owned an airplane. In fact, my dad was the IA, just because of the cost of it. But also, I put a video out a couple weeks ago on aircraft, almost a month ago now, and that was on whether to own or rent. And that's a great video to take a look at. If you are an A&P, that is a benefit. But then again, that becomes a problem when you are sharing an airplane with non-A&Ps, because sometimes your value is not taken into account into the rest of the cost of the aircraft. So that's sometimes when you share an airplane with two non-mechanics, and then you're a mechanic, you end up putting more value into the airplane because of your labor, because of your work and your knowledge. So be careful of that. But I definitely, if you're going to fly more than, the rule of thumb is more than 100 hours a year, it's worth it to own an airplane if you could just find a place to park it. All right, guys. Thank you. I'm going to log off, and I'll see you